Now listen to what Bashar Jafari, Syria's ambassador to the United Nations, has to say about what's happening in his country. Mr. Ambassador, today President Obama called for President Assad to step down, saying, and I quote, that the future of Syria must be determined by its people, but President Bashar al-Assad is standing in their way. His calls for dialogue and reform have rung hollow, while he is imprisoning, torturing, and slaughtering his own people. For the sake of the Syrian people, the time has come for President Assad to step aside. How do you respond?
I think this is an unacceptable statement coming from an important heavyweight administration in the world affairs. We were expecting the American administration to go in a different direction, actually. Do
you deny, though, that your president... Do you deny, though, that your president, his government, has imprisoned, tortured, and killed thousands of Syrian citizens in the past 5 months alone?
I deny categorically, unequivocally, all these wrong references to bloodshed and killings taking place in my country, the way they are described by the media.
We've seen countless videos of children with broken bodies returned after weeks in detention. We've seen people being shot at as they try to retrieve the dead and wounded bodies of their friends and families on the street. And we've seen protests after protests broken up with tear gas and security forces uniformed and not firing live ammunition to crowds. Are all of these lies?
I have also a countless of other videos showing exactly the opposite. I'm not denying that we have losses of lives over there. I'm saying that we should be objective in our approach while analyzing what's going on in Syria. What's going on in Syria is that we do have an opposition, legitimate national opposition, and we are listening to their claims. But at the same time, we do have armed terrorist groups that are resisting the Syrian forces.
Who are these armed terrorist groups?
Crimes against civilians.
Who are these armed terrorist groups, and why is it, after so many years in power, they've all of a sudden sprung up out of the blue? I mean, all of this began in Dara when some children were arrested and being held, and peaceful protesters came out after mosque one day calling for, asking for the children to be released, and they were fired upon. Some of them were shot dead. They weren't even calling for the government to be overthrown. They were calling for the kids to be released and then basic reforms. And now, because of the repression, because of the response by your government, it has escalated.
The government is not running against the civilians. These civilians are our own people. We are there to protect them.
But the government is killing them.
The government is running against the terrorist armed groups.
What terrorist armed groups? Who are they? Who are they? Name them.
Armed groups.
Who are they?
Yeah, those who have killed so far 500 officers and soldiers of our army, and police officers, and police soldiers, and security forces.
Okay, again, you haven't named who these unnamed, mysterious armed terrorists are.
They are the outcomes of the American-British invasion of Iraq, Anderson. They are the Salafists, they are the Takfiris groups, they are the Brother Muslim military wing. They are all these kind of extremist groups in the area. All of them spread all over the area after the American-British invasion of Iraq.
But you have had I mean, your government has been in power since 2000. Before that, Bashar al-Assad's father was in charge. Very, restrictive governments. It seems incomprehensible that all of a sudden you have thousands of Salafists who are calling for the overthrow of the government. It just doesn't make logical sense. I mean, are you denying that there were peaceful protests, that there are peaceful protesters who have legitimate gripes, who have legitimate demands for basic dignity and freedom?
The government allowed peaceful demonstrations to take to the street, and they are protected by the police.
But that's just, come on, sir, that's not true. You know that's not true. I mean, you're a very educated man. You just simply know that is not true. In Dara, when people were asking for children to be released, you're telling me they weren't fired upon, they weren't killed?
You don't know all the faces of the story, Anderson.
Well, first of all, because you're not allowing us in. You're not allowing reporters to actually go to the front lines and see this. You're restricting reporters, so it's a little disingenuous to say you don't know the truth when you're not allowing the international community to see the truth.
Anderson, this is wrong too, because we have allowed 3 delegations, big delegations of tourists and journalists and reporters to enter the country.
You're right, and you keep them in Damascus or you control them very carefully.
we don't control anybody. We are there to protect them from the armed groups.
Sir, I've reported in Damascus, and I had a minder with me who watched everything I did and every single person I talked to, and that was at a time when you didn't allegedly have armed groups going around. So, I mean, to say that you're allowing free reign for reporters is just simply not true.
Anderson, you are biased and taking side, and you shouldn't do that because
I'm taking the side of the truth, and I got to say, I just think what you're saying, you have not offered any proof.
This is not the truth. I am afraid this is not the truth. You are reporting what somebody told you. This shouldn't be done on CNN.
Sir, I'm reporting what I've seen with my own eyes, and I've seen the corpses of little children who've had their penises cut off. I've seen their broken, battered bodies, and I've seen protesters trying to get the dead bodies and wounded bodies of their friends and colleagues and family members and complete strangers, and I've seen people being shot at while they're trying to retrieve bodies.
You wouldn't be more sorry than us seeing these victims. They are our own people, and this is why we are saying that the American sanctions against us and the American President Obama's call for our president to step down are both an instigation and incitement to violence and sending a wrong message to the armed groups that they are under American protection.
Up next, more with the Syrian ambassador. He says outside journalists should come to Syria and see what's going on for themselves. We'd love to. We'll talk to CNN's Arwa Damon, who was there, who tried. We'll see how that turned out. Also, dissident Rezan Zaytouni, who cannot escape the daily reality in Syria. Later. Before the break, you saw Syria's ambassador to the UN essentially sidestepping reality, saying in so many words that video of unarmed protesters being murdered by government security forces is instead video of armed thugs victimizing government forces. Before we listen to part 2 of my interview, take a look. Looks like protesters being tear-gassed and then fired upon on the streets of Homs this week. The ambassador says that's not the case. He says outsiders simply can't understand what's going on. But keeping him honest, is this so hard to grasp or so easy to confuse with something else? Does it seem even remotely possible that in a total dictatorship, the tens of thousands of gun-toting thugs would suddenly emerge and suddenly be doing this? Remember, we've gotten images like this day after day, week after week, month after month, for 5 months running now. Is it possible, as the ambassador suggests, that none of them are what they seem? Do all of the human rights groups have it wrong? All of the countries now imposing sanctions, the UN, all of the brave people inside Syria daring to stand on the streets with dignity and call out for basic freedoms, all of those who've spoken out on this program, are they all making it up? If so, it would be one of the biggest conspiracies, the biggest lies the world has ever seen, which would make Bashar al-Assad history's greatest victim. Is that what you believe is happening? Look at again, another many videos from Syria, and ask yourself, does that seem likely? There, someone being beaten, shoved inside a trunk by what looked like uniformed government forces. Does this look like scenes of a dictator being victimized or a dictator victimizing people? Keep in mind, these images, as you listen to this part 2 of my interview with the UN ambassador to Syria, keep this in mind. Keep the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights accused your government, and I quote, of a pattern of human rights violations that constitutes widespread or systematic attacks against the civilian population, which may amount to crimes against humanity. They go on to say that you are intentionally going after children. They say children have not only been targeted by security forces, but they have been repeatedly subject to the same human rights and criminal violations as adults, including torture with no consideration for their vulnerable status. I mean, how can children be targeted and then returned to their parents? Or do you deny that's happening?
Absolutely. Children are not targeted by the police, neither by the army. But let me comment on what you have just said. The report of the High Commissioner is unfounded and biased. She didn't reflect any of my government's points of view in her report. She didn't even go to Syria. She just relied on reports coming from Syrian refugees in South
Turkey. Sir, back in April, you yourself said that no international commission needed to come to Syria or was allowed to come to Syria because your government was perfectly capable of being transparent and doing your own investigations. But that certainly does not seem to be true.
No, absolutely. I'm sticking to my words, and we are not talking about the commission coming from Geneva. We have allowed, after the presidential statement adopted by the Security Council, we have allowed a mission, a humanitarian mission from OCHA.
But it's been 5 months, sir. Back in April, back in April, apparently you said you didn't need this. So now, under pressure, you're allowing some groups in. Your president has been promising reforms from before he took power back in 2000. Before the Ba'ath Party Congress in 2005, he was promising reforms. And other than a few banking reforms, there's been nothing. And now, yet again, he's promising reforms months from now. Why should anyone believe your president?
Because all these reforms the President Assad talked about are now being fulfilled on the ground. But
he's been in power since 2000.
The media are ignoring this. They are launching and waging a humanitarian war against us.
So you're saying the international media is on the side of Salafists, of Al-Qaeda, of people who would kill members of the West? You're saying the U.S. is on the side of Al-Qaeda-related groups, that Britain is as well, that France is as well, that Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, all of them are somehow now in an international conspiracy with unnamed terrorist groups and gangs against your regime? Does that just sound logical to you?
You are putting in my mouth, Anderson, you are putting in my mouth something I didn't say. I didn't refer to Al-Qaeda. Of course, Al-Qaeda is
Salafist groups which are in league with Al-Qaeda.
I mean, no, you don't know all the details with these very important terminologies. You have to be more acquainted with these words. I know you are an outsider from the area.
You recently accused the West of hypocrisy for describing rioters in England as gangs. I want to play some of what you said.
What happened in London, Birmingham, Bristol is only 1% maybe of what happened in some restive areas in my country. However, some people, they don't want to acknowledge the reality.
Are you saying that what happened in England is the same as your government using snipers and warships against your own people?
This is your own version of the events. I didn't say that. I didn't compare the two situations. I just wanted to shed some light on the hypocrisy of the British Prime Minister while addressing the situation in my country. Any gangs, wherever they are, should be dealt with accordingly by the security forces, whether they are in England, in Syria, in USA. The peaceful demonstrators are tolerated in Syria according to the law.
But sir,
they
are
under the police protection.
That's not true.
This is your opinion. This is your opinion. I respect your opinion, but you have to respect mine.
I've talked to protesters, I've talked to human rights activists inside Syria who say this is not true. A woman whose husband was arrested and kidnapped, taken away, and held for weeks and weeks without her having any knowledge of what happened to him. I've talked to these people.
You may have talked to 1 or 3 or 10 or 100, but Syria is 23 million.
I've heard from many protesters whose loved ones get injured that they can't, or get shot, they can't go to hospitals because your security forces are inside the hospitals and will arrest anybody who's taken in.
This is another lie, Anderson. This is wrong, because we have had many delegations coming to Syria, journalists, reporters, officials. Today we have almost 300 members of a Russian delegation, reporters, journalists, politicians. They visited everywhere in Syria, and they haven't seen any wrongdoings.
They're not allowed to visit everywhere in Syria, and journalists are not allowed to visit everywhere in Syria. I know this. We have tried.
This is wrong, Anderson. This is wrong. I'm sorry. This is wrong, because 72 reporters were in Syria just a couple of days ago. Yesterday, 60 other reporters came.
And you're telling me they have absolute free access? They can go wherever they want, can talk to whomever they want. They could go to Dara. They can go to Homs. They can talk to protesters in the street. Really?
Absolutely. And you know what? The humanitarian mission of the United Nations is going to Syria on Saturday. And you will see with your own eyes that they will fulfill their mission and get back with a report.
Ambassador, I appreciate your time, and I do appreciate you coming on. It's a difficult thing, and I appreciate you talking.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.